As guitarists, we all know tone is super subjective. That being said, I'm going to show you some basics and how to get the best out of your guitar amp. This is my main recording amp right now, the Frenzel Super Deluxe Reverb point-to-point built by Dean Frenzel in the US. I love it because it's really versatile, 50 watts, with 2 preamp voices based on Fender and Marshall Plexi, and a custom 3-band tone stack inspired by the Fender Vintage Bassman. Let's use the Fender preamp to dial in the sound. First, I'll start by setting the gain to 0 and everything else to none. You get your preamp volume or gain and your master volume. So this is from the normal channel, which is the Fender, and this is from the Marshall Plexi, right? The preamp's what drives the front end of the amp, while the master controls the overall output volume. The interaction between those two knobs will give you either a clean or overdriven sound. Let's start with the gain knob. I'm gonna set to maximum, okay? You see. I'm gonna just go a bit further with the master so you can see how it cranks the amp. So I'm gonna dial master back to none and the normal channel just to here so you can see it gets cleaner. So much cleaner, right? Too much cleaner for me in this case. But the way I like to set up my amp is what we call the edge of breakup. So what I mean by that is that sweet spot where the amp is clearly almost breaking. It depends on how much power you're feeding into the amp's input. For Fender amps, it's usually around 4 or 5. Of course, it depends on the wattage. For this amp, I'll dial a bit further to find the sweet spot. So just to make clear, I've opened all my knobs so I can close them later and I'll have more tone to dive in, right? This is where I usually set up my input. As for the masters, I like to add that if your amp is a classic design, it might bloom a little more with the master just a bit higher. So it blooms a little. Setting up the amp at the edge of breakup takes pedals really well without sounding harsh, but we'll dive deeper into pedals in other videos. By setting my amp this way means that when I play harder, it drives the amp. When I play softer, it cleans up. Of course, some people drive a bit further, but that's my sweet spot. It's all about how much power you're feeding into the amp's input. You can get distortion from the preamp, power section, speakers, or all three. Ideally, you want all 3, but that gets loud. So using master volume lets you distort just the preamp quietly. One thing I like to add is that attenuators might solve your problem, letting you crank up the master volume without being too loud, allowing you to get that overdriven sound from both the preamp and the power section. However, some players might not like attenuators because they can compress the sound. Okay, now that we have our gain set up, let's dial in the EQ. Please keep in mind that each amp's characteristics are unique, even when knobs are set to none. Also, that EQ controls interact with each other, so adjusting one knob will affect the others. A good starting point is finding where the signal starts to make a noticeable change. Let's start with bass. I usually keep the bass moderate to let the mids and treble cut through. Mids should be balanced to avoid a nasal sound. And treble, you must adjust to taste. For me, it's around here. Presence might differ from every amp manufacturer, but in general, the presence control enhances the high frequency range above 5 kHz. However, it differs that some of the presence control's output is fed back into the amp's input circuit, amplifying it further. This process adds more edge or bite to the signal, as we call it. By any means, a great tone is incredibly subjective, but it can undoubtedly inspire you to play more and even land you more gigs. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is to trust your ears. Experiment with different settings, listen to how your guitar sounds, and adjust until you hear the tone that feels right for you. Remember, the best tone is the one that makes you want to keep playing and exploring your music. So don't be afraid to try new things and always keep your ears open to what sounds great for you. Thanks for watching, and I hope this helps you dial in your perfect tone.